She knocked at midnight with a baby in her arms. The sheriff removed his badge and let them in. The winter night had a way of swallowing sound out in Coldwater Ridge. Snow drifted in slow, thoughtful spirals, soft as falling ash, piling along the eaves of the sheriff's cabin until the roof looked bowed under the weight of silence. Sheriff Rowan Hale sat alone at his small pine table, lantern dimmed low, badge glinting faintly beside a half-empty cup of black coffee gone cold. Outside, the world was a sheet of white, a stillness that felt older than the town itself, a stillness that warned. Rowan rubbed his thumb along the edge of the badge, tracing the scratches carved into its brass. Each one had a story. Each one had a cost. He'd meant to polish it earlier, but somehow the thought of shining anything tonight felt wrong. The winter storms rolling across the ridge had a way of dredging up ghosts, old memories sharpening like broken glass. He leaned back, exhaling slow. Then, a knock. Not loud, not frantic. A single, soft, deliberate knock. Rowan straightened, the chair leg scraping the wooden floor. Nobody came out here this late, not in this kind of cold. Another knock followed, softer still, like someone barely had the strength to raise their hand. He reached for his revolver by instinct, thumb resting against the worn hammer, and stepped toward the door. The lantern's dim light swung behind him, stretching his shadow long across the floorboards. The cold pressed through the cracks as he reached the handle. When he opened it, the winter rushed in with a sharp breath. And there she stood, a woman wrapped in a thin gray shawl dusted with fresh snow, shaking so hard the fabric fluttered against her arms like a dying bird's wings. Her face was pale beneath the hood of the shawl, skin touched blue by the cold, lips trembling, eyes wide and dark as the midnight around them. She clutched something close to her chest, a baby, wrapped in a frayed blanket the color of dirty wool. The child didn't cry, didn't fuss, just breathed faintly against her, the rise and fall so small Rowan almost missed it. "Please," she whispered. Her voice cracked like brittle ice. Rowan stepped forward, instinct moving faster than fear. He reached out, steadying her by the arm before she collapsed into the drifted snow. She swayed, dizzy, breath fogging the air in short bursts. "Ma'am," Rowan said quietly, "come inside. You're freezing." But she didn't move. Her gaze flickered to the badge pinned to his vest. His winter coat wasn't on, so the brass caught the lantern glow from inside the cabin. And in her eyes he saw something deeper than fear. Recognition, or maybe distrust, sharpened by long roads and worse men. Rowan hesitated only a heartbeat before sliding the badge off his vest. The metal felt colder than the night. He looked her in the eyes and gently closed her shaking hand around it. "I'm not wearing this if you walk inside that door," he said softly. "Not tonight." Her lips parted, breath catching, like she hadn't expected kindness, or didn't know what to do with it. He stepped back, pushing the door wider. Heat spilled out into the night. "Come in," he murmured. "Both of you." For a moment, she stayed rooted in the snow, as though some invisible force still held her out there in the cold. Something old, something painful. Then, with the last of her strength, she stepped forward, baby held tight, and crossed the threshold. Rowan shut the door behind her. The wind howled once, almost angry at losing its prey, before fading into the distance. Inside, the warmth hit her like a shock. She tottered, knees buckling. Rowan caught the child first, instinctively, carefully, fearing she might drop him. The infant's blanket was thin, barely holding heat. "It's all right," Rowan said, shifting the baby against his chest. "I've got him." She didn't answer. Her legs gave out completely, and Rowan guided her gently to the chair he'd abandoned minutes earlier. Her fingers, raw, scraped, shaking, curled over the table's edge as if she needed to anchor herself to something real. Rowan set the baby near the fire in a padded crate he kept for stray pups in winter. The child stirred but didn't wake. Then he grabbed a thick wool blanket from the bed and wrapped it around her shoulders. Steam rose from her clothes as the heat seeped in. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly. No answer. Only the sound of the fire cracking. The sound of someone who had run too far, too long. Rowan poured her the rest of his coffee, slid it toward her. She wrapped both hands around the cup even before lifting it to her lips, letting the warmth soak into her bones. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a thread. "They're coming." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Who?" Her eyes lifted, full of winter and terror, and something that looked like desperation wrapped in resolve. "Men," she whispered. "Men wearing stars like yours." The badge she held glinted faintly in her palm, and the winter wind outside clawed at the walls, as if it had heard every word. She said they wore stars like his, and the words lodged in the room like a thrown stone. Rowan did not meet her eyes at first. He turned to the hearth, stirred the embers with a poker until the sparks opened like thinking things, then looked back. "Stars don't make men," he said quietly. "People do." She laughed then, brittle as ice, a sound that cracked the quiet. "People with stars," she corrected, "and people who follow them." Her fingers tightened on the cup so hard the rim pinched her palms. The baby shifted, a small curl of life, and she pressed her cheek to his head as though anchoring him to the world by the warmth. Rowan sat across from her, the badge heavy in his coat pocket like a promise he'd started to doubt. He'd been the law on Coldwater Ridge for nearly 10 winters. He'd worn the badge through icy funerals and angry bar fights, through marriages and betrayals and slow, grinding loneliness. It was part of him, until nights like this, when the brass felt foreign and the oath it represented blurred around the edges. "What's his name?" Rowan asked, nodding toward the child. She stared at him a long time, as if measuring the worth of the question. Outside, the wind tapped the windows like an impatient finger. The town was a scatter of dim lights and closed shutters. The sheriff's cabin sat like a single pulse in the white. "I don't know," she said at last. "He's been mine only a few days." Her voice thinned. "We were passing through. They'd taken everything except him." Her jaw clenched. "They came with their words and iron, said they were keeping order, took the men first, then the women. I ran with him because it was the only thing left." Rowan listened. He had a map of the valley burned into his head, ridges, gullies, frozen streams that would take a man's life if he slipped. He knew the routes the deputies liked to ride, how the snow held the stories of tracks like a ledger. He thought of his own daughter, gone 5 winters now, and how quickly the thought of a small body, breathing under a blanket, could make a man do foolish things. "What did you do to make them come after you?" he asked, even though he already suspected the answer. She shook her head. Tears knifed through the cold on her face. "I didn't do anything," she said. "They said I belonged to someone else." The words were simple and terrible. "They said the child was stolen. They said I was a thief." Rowan's mouth drew into a line. Men like that, men who wore stars and thought it meant the sky owed them obedience, were hungry for easy answers. They found a face to blame and set a law upon it like a seal. He could feel the weight of such decisions. He had carried similar accusations through his own years, had watched how a community's hunger for certainty could burn a life down. "Why come here?" he asked. "Why not go into town?" She looked at him as if he'd asked why the snow was white. "Because town's where they start with threats," she said. "Here, maybe someone would hide us. Maybe the sheriff would—" Her voice failed. She swallowed, looking straight at him for the first time. The baby between them like a small, fragile truce. Rowan's hand moved to the badge in his pocket without thinking, his fingers circling the cool brass. Memory came like the shadow of a closed door, faces in the morning light, the look of men who trusted their stars more than their neighbors. 10 winters had taught him that authority could be both shelter and trap. He set the badge on the table finally and slid it across to her. "Keep it," he said. "If they ask, tell them you found it. Tell them that a man with a star helped you in the snow. Tell them whatever keeps you warm." She blinked, astonishment softening the lines of her face. She didn't take it. Instead, she lifted her hands to the badge, fingers hovering as if around a relic. "You can't do that," she whispered. "You're the sheriff." "And I'm a man," he corrected. "Tonight the man matters more." He watched her consider it, watched the relief and the fear mingle in her eyes. She finally nodded, a small, desperate thing that felt like surrender and prayer stitched together. She tucked the badge beneath the inside of her shawl, right over her ribs, against the child's head, as if its metal could be a talisman against frost and guns both. The rhythm of the cabin returned in the small sounds. The fire settling, the child's breath, the soft crackle of wet wool as steam lifted off her coat. Rowan moved to fetch a thicker blanket, to check the lopsided door latch that had never kept out more than the wind. He filled a kettle and set it where the steam could warm the room. Watched as the woman, her name still a closed thing, pressed the baby to her chest, and murmured something under her breath that sounded like a blessing or an apology. Minutes slipped by, tempered by the steady, honest work of making a place safer. Rowan wrapped the child in a wool cap he kept for tradesmen who came in soaked, and the baby sighed, a small sound like a bell's last note. He prepared a small bowl of warm broth and fed it to the woman with a spoon, because she wouldn't, or couldn't, lift the babe. Outside, the weather smeared the ridge with an even white. The night folded its hands and watched. Rowan kept an ear for any sound that didn't belong. A creak of ice, a stray animal, the distant clink of harness. He listened for the scuff of boots over fresh snow, for the irregular whisper that meant men riding fast. And then, as he poured a second cup of coffee he had no intention of drinking, he heard it, a low, steady crunch along the lane that led to his cabin. Not 2 or 3 prints, many hooves. With that sound came the slither of lantern light across the snow, a moving gold that cut the white like a blade. He set the kettle down very slowly. She looked up at him, eyes sharp now, with that animal focus a parent has when someone comes close to taking a child. Her fingers tightened around the blanket at her chest. Rowan stepped to the window and parted the curtain with a finger. The yard outside was awash of silver, but beyond it, the procession moved like a shadow folding into itself, figures on horses with cloaks wrapped tight, lanterns bobbing, metal catching faintly. There were more than 3, not townfolk, not simply drunks looking for shelter, men with the gaunt, practiced posture of those who chased answers until they crushed them. A knock sounded at the door then, 2 knocks, confident, official, not the soft plead from before, colder, demanding. Rowan felt the badge under the woman's shawl and he realized with a small, terrifying clarity, so did they. He went to the door. His hand rested on the latch. Inside, the woman drew the baby closer. The lantern's flame painted the room with the color of a last, fragile safety. Outside, a voice called in the dark, crisp and free of winter's hesitation. "Sheriff Hale," it said, "we need to speak." Rowan stood very still, the whole winter pressing on the hinges. He had a choice at the door. He had a badge in his pocket and a child at the hearth. The wind curled a cold finger under the sill, and the room smelled like smoke and the possibility of ruin. He opened the door. The cold rushed in first, then the men. Snow clung to their coats like frostbite blooming along the seams, their breath fogging in hard bursts. 4 riders stood in Rowan's doorway, 3 behind their leader, who stepped forward with the air of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His coat was a deep slate color, dusted with ice crystals, and a silver star was pinned high on his chest. Not brass, not county-issued. The kind men had forged for themselves in backroom meetings and private militias. His eyes swept Rowan once, slow and measuring. "Sheriff," he said, a polite word shaped like a threat. "Name's Captain Morrell, riding with the Ridge Patrol tonight." Rowan nodded, but he did not step aside. "What brings you out in this cold, Captain?" Morrell smiled thinly, as though pleased the conversation had begun on his terms. He tipped his head toward the men behind him, lanterns in hand, rifles relaxed, but ready. "Tracking a woman carrying stolen property," Morrell said. "Passed through our station this afternoon. One of my men swore he saw her footprints cut across the creek, heading toward your ridge." Rowan didn't flinch. "Thieves don't usually head toward the sheriff's cabin." "No," Morrell agreed, "but frightened ones do." Snow flurried around them, sharp as ground glass. Rowan held his stance in the doorway, blocking their view inside. Behind him, he felt rather than heard the woman rise from the chair, the soft rustle of her blanket. The fire cracked once, too loudly. Morrell's gaze drifted past Rowan's shoulder, just enough for Rowan to shift and obscure the angle again. The captain's smile widened. "That's a mighty protective stance," Morrell said softly. "Almost like you're hiding something." Rowan let silence answer him. Out here, silence sometimes said more than words. Morell's eyes darkened. I'll be plain, he said. We're recovering a child, an infant taken from a settlement down valley. The woman who took him slit a man's throat on her way out. My men are eager for justice. Behind Rowan, the woman sucked in a thin breath, the kind you give off only when a memory tears through the ribcage. Rowan heard it like a cry, muffled in a pillow. You're mistaken, Rowan said. No killers crossed my path tonight. Morell nodded slowly, as if granting Rowan a moment of mercy. Mind if we take a look inside, then? Just to ease our concerns. The men behind him began shifting, boots grinding against the ice-packed dirt. Their lanterns swung, casting golden crescents across Rowan's porch. The horses stamped and blew steam into the night, uneasy. Rowan felt the hinge of the moment, how easily everything could break. He stood square. I don't consent to a search. And why not? Morell asked, his voice flatter now. Unless, of course, she's in there. Rowan's jaw twitched. A second voice, quiet but firm, rose behind him. She is not who you say she is. The woman stepped into view, keeping the baby tight beneath her shawl. The lantern light brushed her face for the first time. Chapped lips, wind-burned cheeks, eyes brittle but brave. She didn't hide anymore. Morell's smile froze. There, he said. That's her. The woman shook her head. I didn't kill anyone. I ran because I saw what you did to the others. I ran because you were going to take him. Her arms tightened around the child. You don't even know his name. Morell's boots creaked as he stepped forward, but Rowan moved with him, blocking the entry again, hand resting on the frame, casual but ready. Morell's voice turned to ice. Sheriff Hale, I'll be frank. Hand her over, and this ends tidy. Keep her. His gaze dropped to Rowan's pocket, where the faint outline of the badge pressed through the coat. And I'll need to wonder what kind of lawman you are. Rowan breathed once, slow, like testing the winter air. Then he lifted the badge from his pocket. The brass glinted weakly, a dying star. He held it up between them. You want to wonder what kind of lawman I am? Rowan asked. Morell's lip twitched. I intend to. Rowan closed his hand around the badge until his knuckles whitened. The brass bit into his palm. I'm the kind that won't hand a mother and child to vigilantes wearing pretty metal, he said. That's the kind. Morell's face hardened. The men behind him shifted, preparing. Rowan saw it happening, saw the heat rising beneath their coats, saw the decision solidify like ice turning to iron. They would come inside, they would break past him, and they would not leave the child breathing. So Rowan stepped backward just enough to close the door, slowly, with no fear in the motion. The latch clicked. The woman stared at him, breath trembling. What are you doing? She whispered. Rowan locked the door. Then he turned and grabbed his winter coat, pulling it around his shoulders with steady hands. They're not deputies, he said. They're hunters, men who trade in fear. He checked the rifle he kept beside the hearth, loaded. He slung it over his shoulder. If they want in, they'll have to break the ridge to do it. The woman's grip tightened on the child. Rowan, he shook his head gently. There's a back door. It opens toward the creek bed. Snow will hide your tracks for a while. Go now. Don't wait. She didn't move. Outside, fists pounded the front door. The wood shuddered. Morell's voice cut through the cracks. Rowan Hale, step aside. Another slam, harder. The latch groaned. Rowan stepped toward her, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. You came here for a reason, he said. Let me be that reason. Her eyes filled with something too complicated to name. You'll die, she whispered. Rowan almost smiled, sad, weary. Maybe, but not before winter hears me roar. The door splintered. A boot crashed against the hinge. Rowan took one last breath of warm air, reached for the cabin's single oil lamp, and blew out the flame. Darkness took the room, and winter waited just outside, listening. The dark took the room like a lungful of cold water, swift, shocking, absolute. For a moment, nothing moved. Even the baby seemed to sense the sudden stillness, his tiny breath catching against his mother's chest. Then the door shuddered again. Rowan's voice slipped through the black, low and steady. Go. But she didn't. Not yet. Her fingers tightened on the blanket around her child, as if something inside her couldn't let her feet obey. Another strike hit the door, this one splintering the wood near the hinge. Snow gusted through the widening crack, drifting across the floor in small, glittering flakes that melted the moment they touched the warm boards. "Rowan," she whispered, stepping toward him instead of away. His silhouette turned, faint against the dim glow leaking from the fire's buried embers. "I'll buy you time," he said. No bravado, no hero's tone, just a man accepting winter's terms. "Use it." The baby whimpered softly, a tiny sound that cut Rowan deeper than any blade could have. He stepped close enough to see the outline of mother and child, a single, fragile shape trembling with life, and he placed one hand over the woman's shoulder. It was a brief touch, strong, certain. "You kept him alive in the cold," Rowan murmured. "Let me keep him alive tonight." Her breath trembled. She nodded once, though the grief in that small motion nearly folded her in half. Another slam, wood cracked. Lantern light bled through the opening in violent strokes. Rowan moved. He guided her by the elbow, swift but silent, toward the rear of the cabin. The floorboards there were colder, closer to the outside world. He fumbled once for the latch, an old, crooked thing that stuck in the winter, and then the door finally gave way. The night beyond was a world of white. Snow falling hard now, fast enough to erase footprints within minutes. The wind was rising, turning the ridge into a whispering void. "Follow the creek," Rowan said. "It'll take you behind the mill. After that—" He swallowed. "Just keep going until the wind stops hurting." She wanted to say something, wanted to give him a name, a promise, a piece of truth that might anchor him through what came next. But the words tangled in her throat, caught between gratitude and fear. "My name is—" she began. Rowan shook his head gently. "Tell me when winter's over." A final crash split the front door. Rowan pushed her into the night and shut the back door behind her just as heavy boots broke through the threshold on the other side of the cabin. Snow swallowed her footsteps the moment she stepped into the dark. She pulled the baby close, wrapped him tighter, and slipped along the side of the house, breath muffled by the rising wind. She didn't run, not yet. Running made noise. Running gave shape to her fear. She drifted instead, careful and low, moving like another ghost in the snow. Inside, the cabin erupted, wood thudded, furniture scraped. A man shouted Rowan's name with the fury of someone denied. Rowan answered with silence and motion. A flash of lantern light blew across the front window as one of Morell's men entered. Rowan's shadow slid behind the hearthstones, rifle tight against his shoulder. The darkness blurred him into a single outline, just enough. The moment the first man stepped too far in, Rowan struck. Not with a bullet. He didn't fire. Guns echoed across the ridge, called the whole valley awake. Instead, he moved like the cold, quiet, fast, decisive. He rammed the rifle butt into the man's ribs, driving the breath out of him in a single grunt. The man fell, lantern slipping from his fingers and shattering on the floorboards, sending a burst of flame licking at the spilled oil. Rowan cursed under his breath and kicked snow from his boots onto the spreading fire, snuffing it before it drank too much oxygen. But the brief flare of light had betrayed him. Shapes gathered at the threshold. Morell's voice cut through the dark. "Sheriff Hale," he drawled. "Seems you've made your choice tonight." Rowan steadied his breath, stepping back, angling behind the support beam where the light didn't reach. "Funny thing," Morell continued, boots crunching across the floor as he entered. "A man with a badge helping a murderer escape. That's the kind of story towns whisper over their whiskey." "You know she's not what you say she is," Rowan answered. "That child isn't stolen." "You're right," Morell said. "He wasn't stolen." A pause. "He was born." Rowan's stomach dropped. Born, not taken. Born. Something inside Rowan tightened. A thread pulled taut. Morell sniffed, stamping snow off his boots. "The settlement's rules are clear," he said. "Born off register, born without permission, born under a roof we don't approve of. Same as stolen, same as unwanted." He smiled, voice sweet as frostbite. "We're just reclaiming him." Rowan's blood ran hot against the winter around him. "You don't reclaim people," he growled. "You hunt them." Morell's voice sharpened. "Enough talk. Bring him out." Rowan shifted his stance. He could feel the drafts on his shoulders, the rise of the storm outside pressing its cold breath through the walls. He could hear the woman's footsteps fading along the creek, hurried now. He had bought her seconds, not enough, but seconds mattered. The fire behind him roared softly, hungry to stay alive. Morrell nodded at his men. They advanced. Rowan raised the rifle not to fire, but to fight. Outside, the snow began to fall harder, thick as fur pelts. The wind keened along the ridge, carrying the sound of struggle, wood scraping, breath grunting, fists striking flesh. The woman, clutching her child, looked back once, through the swirling dark. The cabin window glowed faintly with the fire's heartbeat. Then a shadow fell across it. Then another. Then the lantern light inside went out, snuffed by motion or violence she couldn't tell. She turned her face into the wind and ran. The baby whimpered softly, and she whispered back to him, the words torn from her by the cold. "Hold on. Just hold on." Behind her, the winter swallowed Rowan's cabin whole. Snow battered her face as she ran, each flake a needle against her skin. The creek beside her churned beneath a crust of ice, guiding her through the dark like a trembling silver vein. The baby stirred, crying once, a thin, cracking sound that threatened to break the night open. "Hush, please," she whispered, breath stinging. Behind her, back on the ridge, a gunshot cracked, just one, sharp, final. Her legs buckled mid-stride. She caught herself on a dead branch, panting, heart splitting against her ribs. The world slowed, tilted. Snow drifted around her in silent sheets. "No," she breathed, as if the word could pull life back across the distance. But the ridge stayed quiet. The storm took whatever answer she prayed for. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself forward, slipping along the bank until the trees gathered heavier overhead. Wind died here, caught in the pines. She stumbled into the hollow beneath two leaning trunks, a dark pocket of quiet, and sank to her knees. The baby whimpered again. She cradled him tighter, bending her body over his, shielding him from every lash of cold. "You're safe," she whispered, though the words trembled. "You're all I have left." Another gust of wind carried something faint. Hoofbeats. Distant, but closing. Panic surged, but she didn't move, couldn't. Her body was spent, scraped raw by hours of fear and frost. Instead, she reached beneath her shawl and touched the cold metal of Rowan's badge, pressed to the baby's chest. A single breath left her, heavy as grief, warm as love. "Your father died a good man," she said softly, though the child was too young to understand. "A better man than the winter deserved." The hoofbeats grew louder. She held her son closer and waited for whatever came next.